So in this video, we're going to be breaking down a couple tips that I find highly important when owning and bringing home your very first pet snake. So make sure you guys stay tuned to check it out. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Josue from Josue's Exotics, and if you're new here, we make videos about reptiles and amphibians and how to take care of them. So if you're interested in learning more about these creatures, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. So you're thinking about owning a pet snake, but you're unsure of what kind that you would like to get. Don't be that person that goes out and buys the animal spontaneously with no prior knowledge beforehand. And this leads to my very first tip: do your research. There are many different types of species of snakes out there that all have different requirements for actually living a healthy lifestyle. And some of the care that these animals require you may not be up to at the moment, especially if you're not actually used to handling snakes or reptiles in general. For instance, if you're a new snake owner, I wouldn't go out and go buy a green tree python just because of the fact that they are more display pets, I should say, and they do tend to be a little bit more body than your typical like ball python like what I have here. Also, I wouldn't go out and buy a full-grown boa constrictor, especially if you're not used to handling large constrictors or really just larger snakes in general. It can be a pretty scary thing. I just recently got my boa constrictor, but that one's only a yearling, and I've gotten used to handling ball pythons and other things like that over the past year or two, so I feel like I'm ready for an upgrade. So if you're looking for your very first snake, I would highly recommend that you either try a ball python or either maybe a corn snake. But for examples for this video, we're just going to use a ball python since that's what I have, and make it a whole lot easier for the video. So after you do your research and you picked out the kind of snake that you would like to have, the very next step is setting up enclosure for the snake. And this leads up to our second tip. Make sure you set up your enclosure before you get your snake. This can be a very crucial step in making sure that your snake can have a happy life for the rest of his life with you. By setting up enclosure prematurely, I mean making sure that you go ahead and get your substrate in there, make sure you set up your heating elements like heating pads, heating lights, or whatever it is that you may need, and also making sure that your humidity levels are up to par, and make sure you have hides for your animal, water, and all the other necessities. And this will ensure that you won't have any issues whenever your new snake actually gets to your home. So another thing that I noticed with a lot of people, they get new items or new pets or anything like that, normally the very first thing people want to do is take it out and show it to other people and things like that. This is possibly the worst thing that you can do for your new snake, considering that snakes are not your typical pet. In my opinion, they can be a lot more temperamental and a lot more prone to get stressed. So when you first bring your new snake home, it is recommended that you leave your snake alone for maybe 5 to 7 days, as the isolation period for the snake can get settled into its new home, explore around, find the new hides, water bowl, and all the necessities that the snake can thrive. This period is recommended because normally when you go buy a snake, they've been shipped in from another location, and the whole shipping process is extremely stressful for these guys. So normally, that's why I would probably say they recommend this. After the initial 7-day period, you can actually begin handling your snake. So the next tip is, if you see that your snake is agitated, trying to bite, or just generally uncomfortable with being handled, leave them alone. And that's because some snakes will allow you to hold them for hours, while other snakes will only allow you to hold them for a few minutes. And it's going to take some time for the snake to actually build a bond with you, to actually trust you enough to let you hold them. This being is the fact that snakes don't have legs and they don't have arms or anything like that. They're pretty much noodles, and everything in the world just looks scary to them. But there are a few things that you can do to actually get your snake to calm down. The very first thing that you can do is every day, or maybe once or twice a day, you can actually open up the snake's enclosure and put your hand inside the closure, not necessarily close to the snake, but in the enclosure, so that way the snake can get a smell of your scent and get used to that. Because normally snakes only see one of 3 things: predator, prey, or tree. And naturally you will want to be the weird tree that they're hanging on to and stay like that. So the next thing that you can do is handle your snake during a non-active time. For instance, ball pythons are primarily nocturnal species, so during the daytime would probably be a good time to try to hold this species, just because they're not as active and they're a little bit more slow moving around that time. So if you guys are enjoying the video so far, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below and turn on your notifications. That way you can keep up with all our latest videos. And while you're down there, you might as well leave a comment as well. Also, if you would like to donate to our Patreon, I'll put a link down here on this side of the screen for you guys, and I'll also put a link in the description. So we're past the whole 5 to 7 day period of isolation with your snake, letting it get used to its new surroundings, and now it's time to actually feed your snake. Regardless of if you've been able to handle it or hold it or anything, you gotta feed the snake. And this goes back to our first tip: do your research. If you're going to buy your snake from a breeder, you can ask the breeder directly what they've been feeding the snake. And if you bought it from a store or location, you can also ask the employees at the store what they normally feed the snakes, so that way you can keep doing the same thing at home. It's normally easier that way, instead of trying to switch them around and figure things out. I always like to ask questions. That's the #1 thing. Also, another important question is if they've been feeding them frozen thawed or they've been feeding them live mice. From my personal research and from my experience working with reptiles, most reptile keepers recommend that if you're going to feed a prey item to your snake, the size of the prey item needs to actually be the same size as the largest portion of the snake's body. This is going to be the biggest size item that they can eat and they can actually digest and won't cause impaction and other things like that. So this brings us to our next tip. If your snake doesn't seem interested in the prey item, or they're just not striking at it, or something like that, don't keep pestering the snake. After that, you probably need to go ahead and discard of the prey item and try again another time. The common problem that a lot of people have is if they feed their snake one day, they try to go back the very next day and try to feed them again, and then the next day try to feed them again, and the next day try to feed them again. This is another big issue. Snakes are, like I said, very temperamental creatures, and they can get stressed out very easily. So you going in their enclosure trying to feed them all the time, putting a dead rat in front of their face, or a live rat, or whatever you decide to choose to feed your animal, it can really stress them out. So normally what I would recommend is, if they don't take the food that time, wait a whole another entire week and try to feed them again that same day next week, or the usual, like I said, 5 to 7 day period as normally when you first bring them home. That way, if you do stress them out a little bit, they can calm back down and they can get back into a normal habit. Because if snakes are stressed, they're not going to eat at all. I don't know why, but that's just how they are. Moving on to the issue of feeding frozen thawed versus live rats. I explained a little bit about this in a previous video. If you guys want to go check that out, YouTube card over there in the top right section of the screen. But there are a lot of ethical issues behind feeding live mice versus frozen thawed. A lot of people don't prefer to feed their animals live mice, but there are some snakes that's the only thing you can get them to eat. This is due to the fact that in the wild, these guys naturally hunt down prey items and actually take them down and ingest them themselves. But if you can switch your snake over to frozen thawed, I would highly recommend to do so. The reason being that frozen thawed is such a highly available thing online nowadays. rodentpro.com is a really good resource, or you can go to petco.com, or Underground Reptiles sell frozen items as well. You can get those there. So it just depends on what you want to get, and they have anything from pinky mice all the way up to adult mice, rat pups to adult rats, all the way to rabbits and chickens and other things like that. With the most important part being that you can stockpile food for your animals, so that way if you ever do come across a dry spell of being able to find these guys, you can always make sure that you have food for your reptile. So after you got your snake eating the first meal, the next thing to do is set up a feeding schedule. Smaller snakes normally eat about once a week, while the larger snakes can eat maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I normally switch it up a little bit depending on if I see my snakes are gaining a little bit too much weight, or I see them getting a little bit too skinny. So I want to give a shout out to my friend the Dragon Whisperer. I'll put his picture over here on this side of the screen for you guys so you guys go check it out. He's a pretty cool YouTuber. He has some really cool reptiles, so make sure you guys go check him out. So if you guys enjoyed the video today and you'd like to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button down below for me and drop a like button. And if you're feeling up to it, make sure you leave a comment and tell me what your favorite part of the video was today. But nevertheless, I'm Josue from Josue's Exotics, and y'all have a good day.